Okay, well, welcome everyone. Thanks so much for joining us. We are very excited to be hosting the incredible Renée Lertzman. My name is Alana Dawn. I'm the Sustainability Partnerships and Events Coordinator here with the Office of Sustainability. So in today's session, Renée will share her research on the psychology of existential threats and what is being asked of us as practitioners, educators, and leaders to unlock our care for the planet. And we'll also have the opportunity to practice some tools that she's developed too. So I just wanted to say that I hope you're all doing well and taking care. I know the past 6 months or more have been tough with the extreme climate change events happening all over the world and here in Alberta, and in particularly last week, as we see leadership and policy decisions don't always align with taking care of climate and nature. So I honor and recognize the emotions you may be carrying with you today. I'd also like to take a moment and really ground us in the focus of today's session, which will be on how we move forward as climate leaders once we've had that opportunity to really tend to our climate emotions, to be really helpful and supportive guides for others in their climate action journeys and as we build community. To start the session in a good way, I'd like to begin with a land acknowledgement. The University of Calgary is located in the heart of Southern Alberta. Both acknowledges and pays tribute to the traditional territories of the people of the Treaty 7 area, which includes the Blackfoot Confederacy, comprised of the Siksika, the Piikani, and the Kainai First Nations, the Tsuut'ina First Nation, and the Stoney Nakoda, including the Chiniki, Bearspaw, and Goodstoney First Nations. The City of Calgary is also home to the Métis Nation of Alberta's District 5 and 6. So I share this land acknowledgement to honor Indigenous cultural protocols and Indigenous communities who have taken care of this land since time immemorial, and express my gratitude to live on this land. As a settler, I acknowledge my responsibilities as a Treaty 7 person and strive for truth and reconciliation. Indigenous communities here in Treaty 7 and around the world are the most impacted by climate and social injustices and are also leaders in taking care of their land and communities and in climate action. And I'm really grateful for this leadership. So today's session is part of You Flourish, which is the campus mental health and well-being programming. It's running until November 15th. There are lots of wonderful sessions still happening, so we encourage you to check it out. Today's session is also part of UCalgary's Mobilizing Alberta Climate Conversation Speaker Series. The next one coming up will be in February, called Speculative Futures, New Ways of Thinking About Energy, Culture, and Climate Change. We will be with Dr. Kimberly Sky Richards and Dr. Surayan Mukherjee. It'll be a fascinating conversation on how speculative futures can help build just, sustainable, and healthy futures for the whole planet and how we can start practicing it today. So just how the session's going to flow today. After introductions, we'll get to hear from the amazing Renée Lertzman to do her presentation. We'll get a chance to do a breakout group activity, applying one of her tools she's developed. Renée will do a more presentation, and then there'll be a Q&A with all of you. So you've probably noticed this isn't a webinar, this is a meeting, so you'll have access to unmute yourselves. I just kindly ask to keep yourself muted until we get to the Q&A portion. If you could also make sure you put your Q&A in the, your questions in the Q&A function instead of the chat, that'll be much easier for us to be able to select your questions. When we do get into the breakout groups, I do have a couple of space invitations to help you co-create that space with those you're with. So we invite you to remember that we each come with our own unique and different stories and life experiences, and to welcome, respect, and value the unique experiences in the room. This is also an invitation to do what you need to do to take care of yourself. And remember, this is a peer support space. Okay, now I'm very excited to introduce Dr. Sarah Brown to you all. She'll be moderating today's session. Sarah is an associate professor at Mount Royal University, a contract instructor at the Haskayne School of Business at the University of Calgary, and an active adventure guide. Her passion is connecting people with the natural world through education, play, and a deep reverence and responsibility for life on our planet. As a professor and outdoor educator, Sarah is deeply curious how people can connect with their inner selves through exploring the outer wilderness and the transferable skills that can be fostered through experiential education. She is also dedicated to the complex journey of decolonization and reconciliation by taking responsibility as a settler to this land in addressing the ongoing violence of colonization and centering Indigenous peoples and their knowledges. Welcome, Sarah.
Thank you, Alana, for that beautiful opening and introduction. I'm passing over the admitting people from the waiting room to you here.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's such an honor to be here today with all of you amazing participants, and of course with Renée Lertzman. And I'm just going to give a quick introduction to Renee, although I'm assuming that many of you are already really familiar with her wonderful work and excited to get to it. So I'll try not to take up too much space, but Renee is a leading researcher, educator, and strategist who translates relational psychology insights to change our approach to the planetary crisis. So she's applying her graduate training as a psychosocial researcher, specializing in deep human insights. And she designs these amazing frameworks and methods grounded in public health, clinical psychology, and neuroscience that guide people to take action and create impact on climate and sustainability issues. She partners with leaders, founders, an incredible list of people and teams and organizations, startups, innovators, companies across public and private sectors, and really focuses on looking to strengthen climate and sustainability initiatives and harness the creativity and innovation needed to address our most complex and intractable problems. She is a popular international keynote speaker and trainer and facilitator, and has worked with just such an incredible list of organizations. And we're all lucky to be on that list today as we get to learn directly from her. And so, again, I don't want to take too much space, but I really wanted to thank Renee Lertzman from my heart and on behalf of everyone here for generously offering the insights of relational psychology to help us to address all of these somewhat overwhelming existential threats and crises that we're facing right now with regards to just the state of the planet today. And I know that I draw really heavily on Renee's work in my work as an educator here in Tree 7 territory. And I really appreciate the ways in which she gives us all permission to show up as authentic, grounded human beings in all of our messiness with all of our emotions, which of course are all welcome here today. But Renee's focus in this session is really much more about mobilizing these emotions into action and what tools we can sharpen and use to be able to be the leaders we need to be in today's context. So I'll leave it at that today, thanking Renee for her good work, but also thanking each and every one of you for being here today and being part of these collective spaces where we get to support each other in this work. And I will then switch into just listening deeply to everyone and moderating the question and answers at the end. So without further ado, welcome, Renee.
Thank you. Thank you so much. What a gracious opening and grounding and orienting. Much appreciated. So I am here in Portland, Oregon right now. I usually live in California in the peninsula, and I'm up in Oregon these days to be close to my mother who's here and whose care I'm involved with. And as it happens, I have a very special relationship with Canada. Some of you may know, I taught for several years at Royal Roads University in Victoria with the amazing Rick Cool, and got to know so many incredible leaders and practitioners who came from across the country, from all kinds of sectors and backgrounds. And I do have a Lertzman, sort of Canadian Lertzman family. So some of you may know of Ken Lertzman or David Lertzman. All Lertzmans apparently are related. So anyway, I'm just really honored to be here. I want to start with what I always like to do, which is to honor and acknowledge the beginning of something. And what I'm going to be talking about are ways that we can kind of build in some practices and micro practices into how we are in this time and with others in this time. And that's begins with when we come together and when we're in a meeting like this or a session to just give ourselves the opportunity to really arrive and land. And that can be whatever that is for you. I like to take a few minutes or like even 1 minute. And so what I'm going to ask us to do is take a moment And you can, close your eyes or not. You can turn your camera off or not. But I want to invite you to take a minute, and all you need to do is just get really present. So you can feel your feet on the ground. You can use your breath and just take some nice deep breaths. And just do a very gentle and very kind, compassionate scan of your interior. How are you feeling? How's your energy? And all you're doing is just sort of very kind of just doing a bit of a scan, check in, not evaluating, just tired or energized, or you may not know. And if you can make contact with what brought you here to this session, what is that? Is that feeling? What are you bringing? What led you to this session, to take the time? And just bringing that here. And really knowing and relating with that which brought you here is exactly your connection and your love and your courage. So it's really important to give ourselves acknowledgement, because we often feel like we're not doing enough. And I want to invite us to consider just your presence and your attention is actually a lot. And when you're ready, we're going to transition back into the room, into this Zoom room, and now just kind of take stock and just sense into the fact that we are a group here together. And just see what that feels like to be this group of people, some of whom are from different parts of the world. And just notice that, and notice what it's like to be here together right now. And notice what, if anything, might have shifted in doing this over the past couple minutes. And if you feel inspired, you can go ahead and put in the chat, how are you feeling now that we have arrived? What are some feeling words? How are you showing up? How are you coming into the space? If you feel like sharing in the chat. Excited, more present, grateful, centered, ready, community. And I'm curious, you could also notice if anything did shift between those couple of minutes. And this is something that we can do all the time. I work mainly with business, and just this morning was leading a session with a big multinational healthcare company and talking about, with the sustainability people, and talking about, how do we kind of build in moments of really being present, because that really is, like, honestly, that's our real strength and capacity. So I'm going to transition here. Oops, there we go. Okay, I'm going to transition into a bit of a sort of a presentation mode. And the way I'm approaching this is that I'm going to kind of walk you through a bit of a story around, like, what this work is that we're talking about and how I got here. And then I'm going to start introducing you to some of the tools and resources that Sarah mentioned. So come along for the ride. Some of it, I'm going to go through pretty quickly. It's recorded. You can always watch it later. And just stay connected with how you're feeling and doing as we go forward. So I want to just start with context of how I got into this and what influenced me, because I think it's important to know. I think context is important. So, it started for me, this work of joining psychology and environment, specifically back when I was growing up in the peninsula. This is an area south of San Francisco called Los Altos, near Stanford University. And as a kid, I was very, very connected. I felt I really got a lot of solace from nature. My family, I grew up Jewish, and I, it was not the easiest of family situations. There were dynamics that were difficult, and I was very sensitive. So I really sought connection in nature. And particularly I saw it, I at it from a very young age, started seeing psychotherapists. At that time, this was in the mid 1980s. It was, where I was living, it was more available and accessible. And so I was already starting to sort of find myself being drawn to nature, but also the power of working with another person in that context of healing and support and so forth. And that had a really significant influence on me. So I ended up going to university, at University of California in Santa Cruz. And because of my experience with therapy and psychology from a very early age, at 15, 16, I was very sure that I was going to be a therapist. And so I was doing all the usual kind of psychology classes that one does, introduction to, social psychology and cognitive science and all of this. And then, I also was taking introduction to environmental studies. I was taking cultural studies. I was taking anthropology. I was basically learning about the fact that what we think the world is not, at that young age, is not what we think. And a lot was being kind of revealed, including how we, especially in the United States and California, had treated indigenous populations. Like, it was all like being exposed. And this really led to a confluence for me where I became really clear that I really needed to understand on a deep, deep level, what does it mean to be human at this time when we are confronting, our transgressions, so to speak. And I am using a royal we. I don't mean to generalize the we. But what does it mean for human beings to live in this time where many of us are having to really come to terms with transgression, with harm? And recognizing even back then in the 80s, we have language now, trauma informed, trauma this, but back then I was very sensitive to the fact that there was enormous trauma in our system, including the treatment of communities and populations. And, I was just aware there was all this trauma and we weren't really dealing with it very effectively or talking about it. And so I sensed that there was an opportunity here to bridge what we know from the psychological field, and specifically clinical psychology. Sarah mentioned relational psychology. So I am, found myself sort of leaving behind the world of social psychology, research psychology. It's more like that cognitive sort of research aspect, and really wanting to understand experience, like how are we processing and experiencing these issues. And that led me into this whole field that I didn't really know existed. But at this time in the late 80s, there really wasn't a whole lot available about this. And I just basically had to forge out on my own. And I ended up leaving Santa Cruz and I ended up going on a backpacking trip. And I signed up for a field study that was offered at the time that was very innovative. It was all about nature, philosophy, and religion. And we spent 2 full, pretty much uninterrupted months in the backcountry. And the pedagogy was highly influenced by indigenous communities. One of the teachers had been mentored by a community in the Yalabala wilderness. And it was very intentional way of being in nature, in which we were a small group and we were told to not really talk about what's happening in the quote front country, and to really be in the back country and to really take it as a nature immersion. Robert Greenway was one of the, kind of in the lineage of my teacher. He had been a professor at Sonoma State who had founded a field called wilderness psychology. So I found myself in this situation where we were in a circle, in a council, doing a lot of talking, a lot of sharing, a lot of talking stick, a lot of ritual, but also reading and writing, because it was actually a course. And that really changed my life. So I feel like I sort of went in one way and I came out in a whole different direction. And I knew from that experience of 2 months of reading and writing and being listened to and heard and all this, I knew that I was onto something, and that I was absolutely going to do environmental psychology, and in a very applied way. I was just totally clear. So I came out of that field study, and I finished my undergraduate. It's a long story. I'm not going to go through my whole life story here, but I'm going to fast forward to when I actually undertook my PhD research. So I did a master's in communication, environmental comm at University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. And then I, took some time working with organizations. And I really felt like environmental groups and climate groups were kind of missing something. That's an understatement, by the way. I'm a trained as a critical researcher. So I was like, we got to look at this. And so I found myself doing field work and doing my research in a highly industrialized region in the Midwest United States on the Great Lakes. This is Green Bay, Wisconsin. And I was doing my PhD in Cardiff University in the UK in a very unique field that's called psychosocial research. It does exist. It's in the School of Social Sciences. And I was supported by a foundation that was totally focused on the Great Lakes. Like that's all they really were about. And so my remit was I could investigate whatever I want as long as it has to do with the Great Lakes. And so what I did is I found myself there and I sort of perched there. And I was really in an ethnographic mode and a listening mode for what is the experience of people living in this region in relation to the threats facing the water, the land, the nature, the air, climate change. And what are we maybe missing? And so I designed a survey, a market research firm partnered with me, sent it out to, thousands of people. And I picked people who would have appeared from an environmentalist perspective to not be engaged at all. So I picked people who they don't read, based on their media or their political affiliate. I just went right to people who we would normally write off as apathetic. And that was really a very scary thing to do. I didn't know what I was going to find. I was intimidated. I thought maybe nothing would happen. It would be very awkward. And what happened was kind of the opposite, where I found myself using the psychosocial method, which I'll talk about in a few minutes. It's very much about dialogue and listening. I found that these individuals across the board knew a lot about what was going on with the environment, but they were caught up in what I called this environmental melancholia. They were caught up in these dilemmas that they couldn't quite reconcile, which is love of nature, love of the land, love of their family, all of that, and also this deep loyalty and attachment to industry and to all that industry had provided. And by the way, I was talking to, white, like working class industrial folks who had been involved with the industrial practices of this area, right? So people whose parents and grandparents had like worked in the mill. This is a paper mill, or you know, Green Bay is known for packing, the packing industry, meat packing, vegetable processing, you know, all kinds of industrial processes. And what I found was very moving to me is that these people were deeply emotional, but yet they did not know how to engage because it was the discourse was largely defined by environmental groups who were basically saying, you know, it looks like this. Like you need to donate, you need to do this, you need to do that. And the people I met with were like, I'm not an activist, I'm not a radical. And then they just kind of like checked out and weren't very involved. And in actuality ended up voting and supporting policies that were against the very nature, water, and environmental protection that they love. So I could see this playing out, which really didn't make any kind of rational sense. But if we look at it through the lens that I've been trained in, which is more psychodynamic, it's more trauma informed, we see that often people are behaving in ways that are often counterintuitive, but come from a place of, you know, how do I be safe? How do I protect myself? And coming out of that work, I really started to formulate this sense that we have to change the way we approach climate and environment work in a way that ideally is more inclusive, more attuned, and more representative of all the different voices that have stakes in this game. So I ended up using this term environmental melancholia, this condition in which even those who care deeply about the well-being of ecosystems and future generations are paralyzed to translate such concern into action. I'm just for fun, I'm going to tell you, I had to Google that right before this talk because I couldn't remember what is that definition I came up with. Well, it's really easy to find now. And I think this is still holds, right? It's that when people care but are paralyzed to know how to translate this. Okay, so I'm going to pick up the pace here. So I came out of that experience, came out with my PhD, and decided I had a postdoc at Portland State for 1 year, left academia, and then immediately started working as a freelance freelance researcher. And so one of the first things I was commissioned to do was to do a landscape report for Skoll, a foundation, and they wanted a very traditional literature review. Tell us, Renee, what does the social science say about, you know, the psychology of climate change? And when I started getting into it, I realized like, oh, there are these very different ways of defining that problem and coming at this problem, very different ways. And they're all like not really talking to each other, and they all really feel like they have the answer. And so I created this map, and this is a very crude map, and you'll see the more recent one. It's evolved ever since 2013. And basically it's looking at, you know, some people see this as a behavioral problem. Some see it as a messaging kind of framing problem. That's more the policy world. Some see it as a design systems thinking problem, and some see it as really a human relational experiential problem. So I then moved on to start to do a variety of experiments. There's this video that I would love to show if there's time. I'm not going to show it right now because everyone will, there'll be a lot of response to it, but it's a message to climate skeptic American Republicans, using this method of really attuning to their anxieties, their ambivalence, which we're going to talk about shortly, and then creating a script about climate change and then testing it with them in 2 minutes. And by showing that when we affirm what people are actually really feeling, we see this incredible movement happen and people start to align And so by the end of the script, people are like, yes, take action on climate. It's kind of amazing. And so that was in 2014. Published my book in 2015. And then this is where things started to really shift. So I had been more of an academic researcher, and I really wanted to be able to take this work into the world of practice and organizations who could use this. And I was introduced to this field in the public health sector called motivational interviewing. And what that is, it is a clinical methodology that is really designed by these clinicians. It's used in public health to guide people to change. So it's really kind of changing the whole approach from giving people information, kind of yelling, telling, and selling, to what does it look like if we actually use these methodologies to guide people. And it turns out that I had already been doing this a lot, like in my research interviews and so forth. But now I started to have more of a frame for this. So I started practicing, and I was commissioned. This is something I did in, with the energy sector. I just actually spoke with a whole energy network, BC Hydro, week or two ago, where I shared some of this work. So I started working with people in the energy sector, specifically who are all about energy efficiency and trying to use the MI approach. And it was really effective. And then I was involved with a project with the Alliance for Climate Education, where we trained and really gave young people in high school tools to have more productive conversations with their parents or adults in their lives using these principles of motivational interviewing. You can find this online. You can find the report. There's a short video that was produced that really captured the essence of this, and that was sent out to thousands of young people on their mobile phone. And I'm not going to show you the video now, but basically was doing these experiments. And then just kind of fast forward to 2019, this period basically right before COVID, and then with COVID, during that time, the intersection of climate change, mental health, psychology, started to really change dramatically. And so I started collecting and gathering kind of, just in 1 week. This is 1 week in that period of time in 2020, where I started just capturing, the media coverage. And I was inundated with media interviews at that time. And people just really wanted to talk about the psychology of climate and grief and anxiety. And, it was like, we're talking about Rolling Stone, like Time magazine. It was just like really kind of hit the big time. This is a paper by my colleague, Ashley Consulo, and her colleagues. She's a fellow Canadian of yours, and highly recommend this piece. She and her colleagues published this in, I believe it's 2020. And it's very important because it was published in the Lancet. And what they are saying from their more kind of research perspective is what a lot of people are already feeling. And I'm just going to acknowledge that what, many communities and populations around the world, notably indigenous communities, already know. This isn't new, but Ashley works closely with indigenous communities in Newfoundland, and that's influenced her. Her work is so beautiful. So anyway, her assertion, this is a really important framing here, is that ecological grief and anxiety over current loss or anticipated future change are a sign of relationship with connection with the natural world. So that's number one. 2, recognizing emotions are what lead people to act. It is possible feelings of ecological grief and anxiety, although uncomfortable, are in fact a crucible through which humanity must pass. to harness the energy and conviction that are now needed for life-saving changes now required. So the implications of this are profound. The implications of this should change everything about what we're doing in climate and the environment. And I don't mean it's obvious, like it's a no-brainer. I mean that if we really take this in, it does necessitate a reimagining and rethinking of how we do this work, because what they're saying is we need to create spaces, conditions, and context to enable us to metabolize and process. And that is something that a lot of humans are skilled and know how to do. And we need to just be working with them and learning these skills more. So this is a huge kind of paradigm shift right here. And what we also start seeing very concurrently are all these books coming out, right? So some of you may know some of these books. Sarah Jaquette Ray's book is more for undergraduates, and now she has a new book, which I'm going to show here. We've got Leslie Davenport, who is a colleague and very much at the forefront of climate psychology, writing books for younger people. We have British environmental climate psychologists. We have Sally Weintraub. We have Britt Ray, Canadian. And, it's like this field is just really vibrant. So I say this to show the evolution, so that we understand that we're in the process of a field that's rapidly evolving. It's actually very exciting. I mean, it's, I don't need to say that it's not, you know what I'm saying. It's difficult time, but this field is really, there's a lot of really good, wise people who are starting to come together. So we're seeing these new kinds of organizations: Climate Psychology Alliance, Climate Mental Health Network, Billion Minds. There's now a lot of what I call cohort-based organizations. And these are organizations, their model is really about bringing people together in cohorts, which is the way, right? I mean, there's a reason why that's happening. It's academies. It's, Adam Lerner. I don't know if any of you know Adam Lerner, he's in Vancouver, who has been really doing beautiful work where they bring people together through these programs. So I'm just saying there's so many more than reflected here. But this model is one that is very consistent with the work I'm going to be sharing with you about what it means to be really a guide. And how does that change our theory of change? How does that change the way we do what we do? I'm just taking a look at the time here. Okay. So now, with all of this happening in 2018, 2019, I was approached and given the opportunity to develop some of these tools. A foundation in Denmark called KR asked, what would my fantasy be if I was given a grant? And so I put together this vision of, what if we create tools and resources for the practitioner community that really, leverage all of this insight from the more clinical world, psychological world, in ways that people can actually use. And so I ended up calling it Project Inside Out, and pulling together a group of advisors and coming together up with them and with partners and organizations to test and try these things out. So the assertion is, I'm really basically saying, what does it mean if we see ourselves as guides? So that's the invitation. It comes from what I just shared, motivational interviewing. I'm taking it from them, and it's open source, so that's fine. And what I'm finding is that this framing of guiding is actually quite powerful. And what it does, there's a lot of kind of, there's some core beliefs And, these core beliefs include, we really are about guiding versus driving. That psychology is a vital and integral element of our climate and environmental work. That people care deeply, but are overwhelmed, conflicted, and often paralyzed. And that it's our role as change makers to help unlock and guide this change, this care. That includes ourselves, by the way. I mean, we're all going through periods of feeling overwhelmed, conflicted, and paralyzed. Education on its own is not sufficient. So we've seen that. We respect the integrity of every human and that every person is self-determining. Now, that is very important to say because a lot of people unintentionally who are pushing change agendas are pushing and sometimes not honoring and respecting the integrity of each human being, right? But well, I'm going to talk about why that's a paradox of the paradox is if you treat people that way, people are much more likely to engage and join with you. But we have to start with that spirit of deep respect. We guide, partner, catalyze, and unlock each other. We're not about motivating, persuading, changing other people. And we strive for humility, compassion, and care in all that we do. So that's really, really baseline. And so started pulling these tools together. Some of these I had already been using, like that quadrant that I shared. This is now the new version. I came up with something called the 3 A's, which I had, and then some of this started to get developed with bringing these kind of partners and different experts together. One of these tools is a quiz and a practice that invites people to reflect on how am I showing up in this work? And so again, like a lot of what we're doing is grounded in neuroscience and trauma-informed work. So the act of just becoming more aware and self-reflective compassionately is in fact a very powerful and important practice. So these tools are meant to evoke reflection. It's meant to evoke that like, oh, okay, I didn't realize I was going around shouting at people, It's not in any way to say something's bad or wrong. So came up with these like personas, or these archetypes that I was coming across in the space for all those years I'd been working in the environmental and climate space. Cheerleaders who feel like we have to keep people upbeat, positive, inspired. And the theory of change is like, you have to feel inspired to make change. And let's remember what Ashley and her people said. So there's the cheerleader who's just like rah, rah, rah. And honestly, it's often a reflection of our own internal relationship with our painful feelings that get kind of externalized. There's the writer, which is the activist, like finger pointing, don't you know what's wrong with you? And there's the educator, which is I'm going to tell you all the information about all the things going on and all the solutions, and here's the science, and here's the this and that. And in actuality, we need all of these, right? We actually really need all of these. So we need the activists, we need people to just say no, like not okay. We need the educators, we need the inspiration. But what I'm wanting us to think about is how do we bring that together in a more relational way so that we're not just talking at people, because then it's really about us. It's not about the other person at all. It's usually about, frankly, trying to help our own anxiety go down. So what I'm introducing here is, okay, what if we, again, like step into this guiding mode, and what happens there with all of that kind of energy with wanting to motivate people, inspire them, get people to care, all of that. What happens if we go into a guiding mode? And the real superpower of the guide is by evoking often. So evoking by asking questions and by, inviting reflection and by, well, what do you think? And what's your relationship with this? And then the other really key piece I got from my training in motivational interviewing is really offering what we do know in a spirit of offering. Like, I know a lot. I have a lot of experience. Are you open to it? Because I have a lot to offer here. And it's like there's that shift from the pushing to here, like it's on offer here, can really shift the dynamic significantly. So that's the change maker kind of tool or framework. And then I mentioned, earlier there's this quadrant. And so this is a tool I bring into teams and organizations. It's really helpful if you yourself are a change maker activist. You can kind of reflect, and there's a quiz on Project Inside Out to see kind of where you are with this. Am I more of a behavioral, like focusing on incentivizing behavior change? Am I really focused on narrative, storytelling, messaging, language around these issues? Am I focused on solutions, system change? This is the more kind of innovation lens, the got to accelerate and got to kind of ramp up the kind of all that ways of thinking. And then there's the emotional, experiential, maybe this is art-based work. It could be people in nature doing nature immersion, but it's really about embodiment and experience and relationality. And what I realized, my big aha was like, oh, we actually need all of these. Like, I was very, very convinced that it was only the emotional experience that matters, and going around pushing that and probably coming off like, not in the best way, by like being such a evangelist for feelings and psychology and this and that. And then I realized doing this work that, wait a minute, like for one thing, a lot of people working in organizations, we need to use certain tools and, in order to make things actually happen. It's not really sitting in circles processing our feelings is very important, and it's not the whole picture. So that was my big revelation. So what I'm really wanting to guide people through is really, again, reflecting, how can we be more integrated in these? And quite honestly, bring the emotional experiential part of this quadrant in more, and noticing when is it missing? Because that's most of the time it's kind of missing from a lot of our work. And so I'm interested in what happens if we start to bring that back in. So this is where I'm going to introduce the 3 A's and transition into the breakouts. So the 3 A's is a very simplistic, it's, I understand that it's kind of reductive, but it's a tool to help us practice attuning to ourselves and also with others. And before I go there, because people might jump off when we go into this, I want to share one last thing before that, which is the big, what Project Inside Out really produced that I feel really good about are these 5 guiding principles. And this is a playbook for being a guide kind of change maker that is emotionally intelligent and honors our feelings. It's, attuning to yourself and to your people, revealing and being compassionate at telling the truth about what's happening in the world and what we need to do, convening people just like we're doing here in this amazing program. I mean, this is totally what your program is all about, is bringing people together. Equipping, which is also what this is about, is giving people tools and resources, and sustaining and going beyond the big pledge, the event, the campaign, the COP, the this, the that, but like really thinking much more for the long haul, right? Which is all about engagement So I call this work high level about engagement. So those are these guiding principles. Okay, so I'm going to go back to the 3 A's. So the 3 A's are like really support us with attuning, that first principle. And the first A is anxiety. And so we think about anxiety often right now as climate anxiety, like, oh, I'm really scared about the future and, you know, what's going to happen. And what I want us to think about is people that we're wanting and trying to work with who have a very different worldview. They're not necessarily feeling anxious about climate change, but what are they anxious about? Are they anxious about, you know, losing their identity, about being vulnerable, about being left behind? Are they anxious about change that they have no control over? Like, you know, what are people, what are those deep anxieties? And ambivalence is where our people often feel like really pulled and competing and conflicting dilemmas. So on the one hand, this, and then on the other hand, this is core to the motivational interviewing practice, is really the psychology of ambivalence. And it's not about lack of care. It's often that people feel that kind of paralysis that I described earlier. So it's like on the one hand, this, on the other hand, that. And then aspiration is like, you know, what are we all really deeply aspiring for? Which is, you know, could be safety, could be security, love, contributing, having impact, being, you know, belonging, being part of something, being honored, being respected, being acknowledged, being heard. You know, these are these deep, deep aspirations. And often when people, we don't feel we have these met, you know, that's when it really creates a lot of confusion. And we try to get these needs met in all kinds of ways, which can include attaching to, you know, practices that are damaging and harming our world and the environment and ourselves. So the exercises, this very simple practice, is that we're going to reflect on, you know, maybe it's someone you're wanting to work with or are working with who, you know, you feel maybe doesn't care as much about the issues as you do. And I would like you to, you know, go into these groups of 3 and use a timer and take a few minutes and reflect. So just like kind of maybe jot some notes down and reflect for that person or stakeholder group, their anxiety about, let's say it's a particular, it's like something that you're working on or that you care about, food related, or, you know, renewable energy, or, you know, whatever that is. And imagine what their anxiety is about that. Imagine what their ambivalence might be, and then what their aspirations really are. And it's just a practice to kind of, you know, kind of feel into it. In an ideal scenario, we're not imagining, we're actually listening and engaging directly. But this is kind of a way to stretch our imagination more in this empathy, more in the direction of empathy.